One ordinary morning in the quiet city of Houston, the doors of a renowned beauty academy opened as usual. But just a few hours later, the entire Vietnamese community was thrown into complete shock. A woman, successful, strong, respected by hundreds of students, suddenly lay there, alone in a room at the end of the hallway, her life ending in an unbelievably brutal death. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no murder weapon. Everything at the scene appeared to have been staged by someone to deceive everyone. And for years, the killer remained free, beyond the reach of the law, until one seemingly worthless small clue revealed the horrifying truth behind that door. What really happened on that fateful night? And why did a woman who only wanted to reclaim happiness for herself and her children have to pay with her life? On the morning of July 21st, 2015, as usual, employee Anna Tran arrived at Signature Beauty School, a beauty academy located on the bustling Bel Air Boulevard in Houston, to prepare for the new students' practical session. The time was only about 9 a.m., but as soon as she approached the door, Anna sensed something unusual that she couldn't immediately explain. Normally at this hour, the lights inside the shop would be blazing, the open sign would be lit to signal a new workday, and Ms. Tuyet Tran, the academy's owner, was always the first to arrive to prepare everything, from learning supplies to the classroom space. But that day, the entire store was dark, the sign wasn't on, yet the front door was unlocked. This scene made Anna freeze for a few seconds, as it completely contradicted her boss's serious and professional work habits. A feeling of restlessness and unease gradually welled up inside her. Anna immediately pulled out her phone to call Ms. Tuyet, hoping it was simply that her boss had overslept or was dealing with something unexpected. But the phone rang and rang with no answer. Her intuition becoming increasingly unsettling, Anna reluctantly called Trang Vu, Ms. Tuyet's estranged husband, to inquire about the situation. On the other end of the line, Trang Vu's voice seemed calm, reassuring her that Ms. Tuyet was probably just running a bit late, telling Anna to be patient and go ahead and start the class. He even mentioned that he had asked someone to record a video to help with the lesson. However, when the call ended, Anna's instinct was still not at ease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and that unease only grew in the unusually quiet space of the beauty salon that was always bustling every morning. Her intuition that something was amiss becoming clearer by the moment, Anna decided not to hesitate any longer and called Hai Pham, a person who was both a business partner and a longtime close friend of Ms. Tuyet and her husband, hoping he could quickly come check on the situation. Upon receiving the news, Hai immediately dropped his work and rushed to the store. Around 10:45 a.m., Hai arrived at the shop. As soon as he stepped through the door, before his eyes was a disturbingly chaotic scene. The shop sign lying on the floor, the cash register drawer pulled open, belongings scattered everywhere as if someone had been rummaging hastily. In an instant, Hai immediately felt as if a robbery had occurred here. Unable to hide his confusion, he quickly called Trang Vu back to ask what was going on. But on the other end of the line, Trang Vu's voice remained inexplicably calm, only saying that Hai should try contacting Ms. Tuyet's roommate, as she had recently moved out to stay temporarily elsewhere. Trang Vu's words didn't make Hai feel reassured at all. He continued carefully going deeper into the shop, checking each area. When he neared the end of the hallway, he froze, his eyes stopping at a pair of motionless legs visible from the doorway of the back restroom, surrounded by a pool of blood. An ominous premonition immediately rose within him. Hai hurried forward, hoping it was just a misunderstanding, but when he entered the room, the image of Ms. Tuyet Tran lying there, no longer moving, confirmed all his fears. The horrific scene before his eyes left him unable to remain calm, and in a panic, he immediately called 911 for help. Shortly after receiving the emergency call, Houston police quickly arrived at the scene and began securing the area. The front room of the shop showed signs of being hastily ransacked. The cash register drawer was pulled open and empty, and various items were scattered everywhere, creating the impression that a robbery had just occurred. However, experienced investigators immediately noticed unusual details. First was the entrance door, which showed no signs of forced entry, leading them to suspect that the perpetrator had either been let in by the victim or had their own key to enter without obstacles. Stepping inside, they also noticed that near the door, the cosmetics display shelf was still very neat and undisturbed, and decorative vases were not broken at all. This was in complete contrast to the cash register area, where items like magazines and notebooks remained orderly, with no blood traces around this area, contrary to the obvious bloodstains in other areas of the shop. Police continued following the blood trail, which led them to the back area of the shop. In a small restroom at the end of the hallway, they discovered Ms. Tuyet Tran's body lying face up on the floor, surrounded by a thick pool of congealed blood around her head. A preliminary examination showed the victim had suffered 13 wounds from blunt force trauma to the face and head area, fracturing her skull. Her hands had multiple cuts and fractures at the wrists, signs showing she had desperately tried to defend herself before falling. The medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was severe head trauma. Although the scene appeared chaotic, it had a strange orderliness. The victim's purse was placed neatly on a table in the classroom, with Ms. Tuyet's credit cards and papers still inside, completely untaken. In fact, Ms. Tuyet even had cash in her pants pocket that remained untouched. In the adjacent bathroom, investigators discovered 2 of the victim's cell phones smashed and thrown at the bottom of the trash can. This detail further clarified that the scene showed signs of being staged, because if this were a robbery, the perpetrator would have taken the phones to sell, not destroyed them for no reason. This further confirmed suspicions that the incident was not a simple robbery. Moreover, valuable items like credit cards and cash were left completely untouched. Additionally, the murder weapon was identified as a small compact blunt object with square edges and a long handle, allowing for powerful strikes when attacking. Such a weapon was unlike the common weapons robbers typically use, as most would choose firearms or knives to quickly resolve the matter. Furthermore, if this were just a robbery, then 13 wounds were clearly excessive, which made no sense at all. From these signs, police began to suspect this was not a simple robbery, but rather a targeted attack, very likely the result of a personal grudge. Police then discovered an important clue from the security camera of the adjacent shop. Although the camera's angle couldn't capture images from the victim's shop, the audio was clearly recorded. The tape captured screams and loud banging sounds from inside the beauty salon on the evening of July 20th, divided into 2 episodes, each about 20 minutes apart. The first episode occurred at 8:17 p.m. and the second at 8:41 p.m. Typically, a robber would act very quickly and then flee. Few would be calm enough to remain at the scene that long. These details led investigators to believe the scene had been crudely staged to mislead them, and very likely the perpetrator was someone known to the victim. From this investigative direction, Houston police decided to review Tuyet Ngoc Tran's file to learn more about her circle of relationships, thereby narrowing the search for suspects. The victim, a woman named Tuyet Ngoc Tran, born in 1966, was a petite Vietnamese woman who possessed a strong spirit and extraordinary determination. In 2000, Tuyet left Vietnam to seek new opportunities in America, bringing with her a desire to start a promising life. In this foreign land, she married Trang Vu, a fellow countryman, and together with her husband built their career from scratch in Houston. Initially, they only had a small hair and nail salon. However, with diligence, persistence, and ambition to advance, they developed Signature Beauty School, a beauty academy and beauty career training center prominent in Houston's Asian community. Tuyet was not only a skilled beautician, but also personally taught beauty care courses to students, sharing her passion and professional knowledge. At nearly 50 years old, Tuyet Ngoc Tran had become a successful businesswoman, owning Signature Beauty School, a prominent beauty academy in Houston's Chinatown district. Not only successful in her career, she was also a wonderful mother to 2 teenage children. During the day, Tuyet was busy running the beauty academy, where she not only taught beauty care courses, but also directly managed and mentored future students. In the evenings, she returned home to care for her family, gathering with her children, becoming the attentive mother in everyone's eyes. To the Vietnamese community in Houston, Tuyet was not just a woman successful in her work, but also a model of determination and willpower, a shining example for those living far from home, seeking opportunities in a new country. However, behind the image of that successful woman were hidden corners few knew about. Close friends all noticed that Tuyet's marriage was far from happy. Her husband, Trang Vu, had a patriarchal personality, and their family life frequently faced conflicts and psychological pressure. Tuyet, though always strong in front of others, had confided in close friends that she felt extremely suffocated and fearful in her own home. Those confessions raised suspicions in the hearts of her close friends, and all eyes began to turn toward her husband, Trang Vu. When he received news that his wife had been murdered, Trang Vu's reaction was very puzzling and abnormal. According to police reports, when he arrived at the scene, instead of being shocked and grief-stricken, he hastily denied responsibility in a strange manner, volunteering on his own that he was not the one who harmed his wife. This could not help but catch the police's attention. The fact that a husband would hastily deny guilt when no one had even questioned him made suspicions grow even heavier. The abnormal feeling in his behavior led police to ask the question, could this be the overly hasty reaction of a guilty person? During the investigation into the victim's family relationships, police quickly discovered a history riddled with domestic violence in Tuyet Tran's life. Records showed 5 instances where police had to intervene due to domestic abuse incidents, although Trang Vu had never been arrested or held accountable for his actions. Neighbors and Tuyet's relatives also shared that Trang Vu had a violent temperament and had physically assaulted his wife in front of their children and even employees at her beauty salon. Facing this abuse, Tuyet Tran had quietly prepared for an independent life. In May 2015, she decided to move out of the house, taking her 2 young children to temporarily stay with a close friend to escape the painful life at home. Not only that, she also hired a lawyer and proceeded to file for divorce. Tuyet also filed for a restraining order against her husband, accusing him of frequently beating and threatening her. In a sworn affidavit filed with the court in early July 2015, Tuyet clearly stated that her husband owned firearms and she feared he might use them to kill her. Tragically, all of Tuyet's preparations could not be completed in time. Due to some administrative procedural issues, her divorce petition and restraining order request had not yet been processed by the court at the time of the incident. Right at that time, another important clue gradually came to light, related to the custody dispute between Tuyet and Trang Vu. At the time Tuyet fell victim to the brutal attack, the couple was in the midst of a fierce battle for custody of their 2 children. Due to the domestic violence situation, Texas Child Protective Services had to temporarily place the 2 children in government care starting in May 2015 to ensure their safety from the dangerous home environment. On July 20th, 2015, a social worker from Child Protective Services scheduled separate meetings with each parent to discuss the long-term care plan for the 2 children. At this time, Trang Vu arrived to meet with the worker around 3 p.m., beginning the exchange with an apparently calm demeanor. Nothing unusual. However, when Trang Vu was informed that custody would very likely be awarded to Tuyet, he suddenly became enraged, shouting and pacing back and forth in tension. He loudly protested, claiming such a decision was unfair, and even asserted that it would be better to let the government raise the children than hand them over to a mother with only a 5th-grade education who isn't capable of teaching them. Trang Vu's aggressive and stubborn attitude made it impossible for the meeting to continue, and the social worker was forced to abruptly end the session. Late that same evening, Trang Vu provided a statement to police that after the meeting ended at 6 p.m., he had stopped by his wife's beauty salon to help clean up the shop. At that time, there was an eyelash extension class in the salon taught by expert instructors from California. Multiple witnesses at the shop confirmed that Trang Vu appeared at the salon around 6 p.m. that evening and stayed to help his wife until the class ended. They also saw Ms. Tuyet Tran, along with Trang Vu and several other employees, tidying up the remaining items in the center after the class concluded. However, some other witnesses provided additional suspicious information. Around 4 p.m. that afternoon, a tall, thin black man had stopped by the beauty salon attempting to sell cheap jewelry. However, after employees and students declined to buy, this man left after just a few minutes. What was noteworthy was that after the class ended around 7 p.m., Anna Tran, one of the shop's employees, briefly saw a black man enter the shop as she was leaving, look around for a moment, and then immediately leave. Anna couldn't determine whether this man was the same person who had tried to sell jewelry in the afternoon, but his appearance attracted attention and became an important detail in the investigation. However, Trang Vu immediately seized upon this detail to fabricate a story about a suspicious stranger. During interrogation, Trang Vu stated that while he was helping his wife count tuition money at the end of the day, a black man entered the shop. According to Trang Vu, this person looked very crazy, staring intently and then suddenly leaving. Feeling it was dangerous, Trang Vu said he had quickly run to his car to retrieve a weapon from the trunk as a precaution and urged his wife to close the shop as soon as possible. After that, Tuyet Tran locked up the shop and went to her friend's house while Trang Vu drove home. However, Trang Vu's statement did not convince the police at all. Data from security cameras showed that after 7 p.m. that evening, no one else entered or left the shop except for Trang Vu. Additionally, audio recorded from the adjacent shop's CCTV showed that between 8 and 9 p.m., someone was still inside the shop. When pressed about whether he had truly left at 7 p.m., Trang Vu stammered in response, saying that actually he had intended to go buy flowers and return to the shop, but changed his mind midway. From this point, investigators quietly concluded that Trang Vu was the prime suspect in the case. However, to bring charges convincingly, they needed more concrete evidence. The biggest problem at this time was that the murder weapon, the hatchet or hammer, had disappeared without a trace. Based on the shape of the wounds on the victim's body, police suspected that the perpetrator had used a small hatchet or hammer, tools with square edges capable of creating severe and deep wounds. Furthermore, police learned that Trang Vu typically kept a short-handled hatchet in his car, along with some firearms for self-defense. This made Trang Vu an even more suspicious target. However, when asked about this hatchet, Trang Vu gave a vague answer, saying that he had forgotten where he left the hatchet and now couldn't find it. This answer only deepened investigators' suspicions that this very hatchet could be the murder weapon, and that Trang Vu might have disposed of it after committing the crime to eliminate evidence and prevent police from finding clues. These signs further reinforced suspicions that Trang Vu was the perpetrator. Unfortunately, despite conducting thorough searches and investigations, police were unable to locate the hatchet, the crucial murder weapon, throughout the following days. By the end of 2015, the investigation had reached a dead end. Trang Vu, as the prime suspect, had been interrogated multiple times but continued to adamantly deny guilt. He repeatedly told the story about a mysterious black man who had come to his wife's shop, but couldn't provide any verifiable evidence, witnesses, or video footage to refute police testimony. Therefore, the case file at this point could only rely on circumstantial evidence, making prosecution very difficult, as the evidence wasn't strong enough to convince a jury. Then, just 3 months after his wife's death, Trang Vu quietly filed for a legal name change, taking the new name Itani Losangel Mileni. He moved to another state, attempting to start a new life. Trang Vu even gave up custody rights to his 2 children and lived a transient life as a long-haul truck driver. This action was clearly an effort to sever ties with the past, but despite trying to change his identity and life, the net of heaven has large meshes, but nothing escapes it. And then, the crucial turning point came from the perpetrator's own greed and overconfidence. In early 2017, shocking information suddenly emerged. Itani Mileni, who was actually Trang Vu, had filed a claim demanding the insurance company pay out benefits from a $275,000 life insurance policy that Tuyet Tran had purchased in 2008. According to the contract, Trang Vu was the primary beneficiary, while the 2 children were only listed as contingent beneficiaries. Although it's not unusual for a husband to claim insurance money from his wife's policy, in this case there was a major problem that Trang Vu had not anticipated. That was the Slayer rule, which essentially means that if Trang Vu was suspected of being involved in his wife's death, he would not be permitted to receive the insurance money. For this reason, Reliance Star Insurance Company immediately denied the claim, as this reflected a conflict between benefits and the legal situation. Not willing to give up, the insurance company filed a lawsuit in federal court in September 2017, requesting the court to determine who rightfully deserved to receive the insurance money. The civil trial over insurance beneficiary rights, which lasted for 2 years, unexpectedly became the crucial key to unlocking this criminal case. This time, the attorney representing the two children's interests took an extremely astute action. He subpoenaed Tran Vu to court to give sworn testimony before the federal court. This forced Tran Vu to answer a series of detailed questions about his wife's sudden death, and it was here that he revealed inconsistencies and contradicted what he had previously stated. Specifically, in his new testimony, Tran Vu admitted that he had left the shop, leaving his wife behind alone, which completely contradicted his original story that both husband and wife had left the shop at the same time. When pressed about why he would leave his wife alone, despite just suspecting a potential robbery, Tran Vu repeated the extremely unreasonable excuse that he had gone to buy flowers. Even more importantly, during the deposition, Tran Vu inadvertently mentioned the hatchet, the murder weapon, and said he had lost it. This detail coincidentally matched the suspicions about the weapon that police had harbored all along, and it seemed Tran Vu had a guilty conscience, bringing up the weapon without anyone asking about it. And then over time, the seemingly unrelated civil evidence gradually became crucial puzzle pieces, helping to strengthen the entire criminal case file of the Houston Police Department. The Harris County District Attorney's Office had quietly coordinated with the parties involved, collecting every document from the insurance lawsuit, every testimony, every legally significant detail, to piece together a complete picture of the case. Motive, opportunity to commit the crime, cover-up behavior, and especially Tran Vu's blatant lies. Things that had not been clearly demonstrated in the criminal file before. By early 2019, the insurance company finally made a definitive decision. They chose to settle with the victim's two children, agreeing to transfer all insurance benefits into a trust fund for them. This agreement was finalized in April 2019, meaning all financial ties related to the case were now clear. And it was precisely at that moment that investigators and prosecutors felt they had sufficient grounds, enough evidence, and enough confidence to take the step they had been waiting for so long, to issue an arrest warrant for the man they had always suspected was the killer. On April 16, 2019, the Harris County Court officially issued an arrest warrant for Itani Losangal Maleni, also known as Tran Vu, on charges of murdering his wife. At that time, Tran Vu, 52 years old, was traveling across the United States in an 18-wheeler as a long-haul trucker, seemingly having shaken off the dark shadow of his past. However, just 4 days later, on the morning of April 20th, 2019, a U.S. Marshals task force tracked him down and surrounded his truck in Bluffton, Indiana. As soon as Tran Vu stopped the vehicle, officers immediately closed in. He appeared shocked and stunned when he was restrained and handcuffed on the spot, a moment that showed he truly believed he could comfortably escape justice after all those years. From circumstantial evidence and the suspect's contradictory statements, police were able to partially reconstruct the entire sequence of events. On the morning of July 20th, 2015, Tran Vu had a meeting with a social worker regarding the custody battle for his two children. This was an issue that had obsessed and embittered him for a long time, because deep down, Tran Vu always believed his wife was inferior, incapable of raising children, and unworthy of being a mother. So when the social worker informed him that custody would likely be awarded to Tuyet, the emotions he had suppressed for so long exploded in an instant. His rage made it impossible for Tran to remain calm. He shouted, paced back and forth in agitation, vehemently protesting this decision. And in his loss of control, he suddenly left the office around 4 p.m. that afternoon without another word. In Tran Vu's mind at that moment, dark thoughts had begun to form. He drove straight to Signature Beauty School where Tuyet Tran was working, with a single purpose: to find a way to turn the situation in his favor. And very likely, it was during that time that he conceived the intention to strike, both to prevent losing custody of the children and to quickly seize the insurance money he had long coveted. Around 5:30 p.m., Tran Vu appeared at the beauty academy. He smiled and chatted with customers, appearing completely calm, even helping employees clean up after class. When Tuyet Tran saw her husband, she was somewhat flustered and wary, but because there were customers and students around, she still tried to maintain a composed and polite demeanor. Just then, a strange man suddenly entered the shop, causing everyone to freeze. This person said nothing, just stood staring intently. Trang Vu immediately seized the opportunity, pretending to protect his wife, running to his car to retrieve a weapon and tucking it at his waist, then returning to stand in the shop, creating the image of a righteous, protective husband. Around 7 p.m. that evening, the class ended. Students and guest instructors gradually left. A few people were concerned seeing that Tuyet Tran would have to stay alone, but Trang Vu reassured everyone, saying he would stay with his wife until the cleanup was finished. Hearing this, everyone felt at ease and left the shop, and at 7:10 p.m., the door of Signature Beauty School closed. Inside the beauty salon, only 2 people who had once been intimate remained. After many weeks of separation, this was the first time the couple had to face each other in such a closed, private, and suffocating space. No one besides them knows exactly what transpired during that fateful hour, but investigators believe there must have been a tense confrontation between them regarding the divorce and custody rights. The resentments accumulated over the years, the irreparable wounds, and the smoldering hatred in the turbulent marriage finally erupted. The atmosphere in the shop quickly became stormy. Then the sounds of arguing, chairs falling, and objects crashing began to ring out, shattering the silence of that evening. At the climax of the confrontation, Trang Vu completely lost control and pulled out the short-handled hatchet he had brought with him. Around 8:17 p.m., the first sounds of the attack echoed through the shop, the sound of heavy objects colliding, screams, and desperate cries for help. In his fury, Trang Vu repeatedly swung the hatchet, while Tuyet Tran cried out in pain and terror, defending herself hopelessly. A powerful blow caused her to fall to the floor, but she didn't collapse immediately. With her last bit of strength, Tuyet tried desperately to crawl away, seeking escape from the hands of the man who had once been intimate with her. Evidence at the scene later showed she had dragged herself from the front room area to the restroom at the end of the hallway, a painful testament to the final struggling moments of this unfortunate woman. At some point, Trang Vu apparently paused when he saw his wife motionless. He shifted to staging the scene, attempting to make the crime appear as a fake robbery to mislead the investigation. But right then, Tuyet regained consciousness, if only for a moment. It was that very moment that caused Trang Vu to panic, and in his fear of being exposed, he swung the final blow with the hatchet, ending the life of the woman who had been the mother of his children. In a place that should have been filled with beauty and light of a beauty academy, Tuyet Ngoc Tran drew her last breath, under the cruel and cold-blooded hands of the very man she had once trusted and called her husband. Finally, Trang Vu took the hatchet outside, intending to dispose of the murder weapon in a remote location, perhaps a river or stream somewhere where the water would wash away all traces. He believed that as long as he destroyed the weapon, all clues would be severed and he could escape suspicion. At 9:31 p.m., the security camera of the adjacent shop captured the moment Tuyet's Toyota Highlander's lights flashed, a sign that someone had just unlocked it and was preparing to start the vehicle. A few seconds later, the footage showed Trang Vu approaching, opening the door, climbing into the driver's seat, and then starting the engine and driving away. The vehicle's low-jack tracking system also confirmed the exact moment the Highlander left the area at 9:32 p.m. Shortly after, another camera near the scene continued to capture images of Tuyet's car turning off the street where the beauty academy was located before disappearing into the Houston night. At 9:35 p.m., the vehicle stopped at a deserted parking lot behind a shopping center, approximately half a mile from the scene. Here, Trang Vu began creating a fake crime scene. He used the very hatchet, the murder weapon, to smash the driver's side window from the outside, deliberately creating the impression of a sudden attack and robbery. He ransacked papers, threw belongings haphazardly throughout the car, and left the door wide open. Not stopping there, knowing the Toyota Highlander was equipped with a low-jack tracking system, Trang Vu ripped out the device's wiring to cut off the tracking signal, hoping to erase all traces of that night's movements. Once he had completed each step in the charade he had orchestrated, he returned to his own vehicle, left the parking lot, taking with him the hatchet, the most dangerous piece of evidence. On the way home, he disposed of the murder weapon, throwing it away at an undetermined location, then drove straight home. At 2:20 a.m., Tina Dam, Tuyet's close friend, anxiously called Trang Vu, asking why Tuyet still hadn't come home. He casually told Tina not to go to the shop and instead directed her to contact Cindy, the person who was letting Tuyet stay temporarily during the separation. Not long after, near midnight, Cindy, not seeing her friend return, also frantically tried to contact Trang Vu. This time, he changed his tone, pretending to be confused and worried, then deflected by saying that Tuyet was probably somewhere else. Through this ploy, Trang Vu deliberately pushed Tuyet's two friends into a confusing circle, searching for each other to verify the victim's whereabouts, while he remained inactive, separating himself from the story, playing the role of an innocent bystander. The first trial for the murder of Tuyet Ngoc Tran took place in June 2022 at court. Prosecutors exposed the detailed criminal conspiracy of millennia. They presented the complete chain of evidence from the staged robbery scene, the physical evidence such as the smashed phones and abandoned car, to the defendant's lies about the stranger and going to buy flowers. Particularly important were the documents from the insurance lawsuit introduced as crucial evidence. Police records of 5 domestic violence reports were presented, along with copies of Tuyet's restraining order petition. Together, these painted the portrait of a domestic abuser whose violence escalated to murder. On the defense side, Millenni exercised his right to remain silent and did not testify in his own defense. His defense team attempted to cast reasonable doubt on the evidence, emphasizing that police had not recovered fingerprints or direct DNA evidence at the scene to implicate their client. The murder weapon was never found, and everything was merely speculation. The defense attorneys even called several of the defendant's family members to testify, claiming that Trang Vu grew up in difficult circumstances, had to work multiple jobs to support his family, and any violence was due to excessive stress rather than malicious intent. Around the end of June 2022, when both sides were about to conclude their arguments, the judge had to declare a mistrial due to information that some jury members had inadvertently heard inflammatory statements from outside. This was a rare complication that caused the victim's family immense anxiety, as they had to wait even longer. Prosecutors even requested a different judge due to concerns about bias, but this request was not granted. The second trial was held in September 2022, also at Harris County Court. This time, all proceedings went smoothly. After 6 tense days of trial, the jury reached a verdict, and they took only 25 minutes of deliberation to unanimously declare Itani Losanjal Millenni guilty of first-degree murder. Next came the sentencing phase, where the judge determined the punishment. The prosecution requested a life sentence for the defendant. The defense proposed a 25-year prison sentence, citing family circumstances and arguing that the defendant was already elderly. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Itani Losanjal Millenni to 55 years in prison. With this sentence, the 52-year-old man will spend nearly the rest of his life behind bars. The defendant can only be considered for parole or early release after serving a minimum of 27 years under Texas law. Tuyet Ngoc Tran, a woman who spent nearly her entire life building happiness, caring for her family, and establishing a proud business in a foreign land, but ultimately fell at the hands of the very husband she once loved. And that is today's case. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.